This is a special presentation from the Brighton Central School District Board of Education.
Thanks. So thanks everybody for coming tonight to our Community Budget Forum. And we're doing this two different ways, both with people here in the room and then also on Facebook Live, so more people could join us as well. So we thank everybody for chiming in, and would remind people in just a moment there will be a link that goes up and a QR code to join a thought exchange that has to do with tonight around their reaction to the budget and questions and answers that we can give to people who are asking from the live event and for those in the room too. And we'll have a microphone for those in the room. You don't have to enter your questions or your comments in the thought exchange. You certainly can, and that's helpful in terms of memorializing them and helping us to see how other people feel, for people to also weigh in on your thoughts and your questions. But we would encourage people to jump into that. A couple different ways we're going to do that. But take a look right now, the QR code. If you point your camera at the QR code, it should bring you directly to a link, and you can jump in and, again, offer comments. You can also text the code 586-614-697 to 72855 to jump in there. Or you can go to my.thoughtexchange.com /# and the same code 586-614-497. And this QR code is on several of the slides, so it'll pop up again in a couple minutes. And when I get towards the end of this brief overview, this same slide will come back up, so you could jump in at that point if you'd like. I'm just going to give it 15 seconds or so here if you'd like to use that before I move on. And I'll tell you what we're going to do before I go to the next slide, which is take a look at a condensed version of the information shared at our 5 o'clock meeting tonight, which is the current state of the budget proposal, or the budget process, really. It's not even close to a proposal yet. What the numbers look like at this very moment, and to take a look at the feedback from the community, the way that it was organized and grouped. We'll go through that, and then we'll jump into the live exchange and see what people's questions are, what their comments are. I'll be able to answer a few of those. Those on Facebook Live who are entering comments on the Facebook site, on the BCSD site, your comments are being entered into the exchange by Dan Goldman, our communications coordinator, as well, so that they're included in that at the same time. At about 7:30 or so, we're going to break this room up into smaller groups and give people an opportunity to go to one of 4 groups to weigh in specifically on that particular category of strategy. And what I mean by that is, for example, one of the groups is around extracurriculars, arts, music, athletics, etc. And we're going to ask you to spend just a few minutes triangulating the data, weighing in on the comments that were shared and expressing yourself to one of our administrators and board members, really helping us understand, what do you think people meant? What more should we know about that particular area? So without further ado, I'll jump in then to the information. First, our property tax cap number was approved by the board tonight for submission to the state at the end of this week. This number is not a negotiable number. It's not a number that we create. Rather, we follow a formula that the state gives us, and our cap number this year is 3.3%. 3.3%. It is not 2%. It's not less than 2%. What you read in the media is not always accurate relative to the description or to the number. It's not a 2% property tax cap. It's different actually for every school district based on a variety of factors that are unique to them. For us, one of the factors that impacts us is the increase in capital expense that's in the budget. Approved in 2017 by voters, now that capital expense is being incurred and is partially excluded in the cap calculation. And what that means is, of the $1.6 million in additional capital in this year's budget, $731,000 can be excluded from the levy cap, and that increases then your cap number, and that's why we're at 3.3% in addition to the other factors. So that's the number going into it. The budget right now as it stands, the difference between the 1920 budget and the 2021 budget is a difference of 5.5% in operations and 2.1% in capital. That red number all the way at the bottom, the $1.6 million, is the debt service that we are beginning to pay on. And you can see the increases in the other areas. We're up about 3.2% in terms of salaries. That's not each individual salary, but rather the spending in that particular area. Benefits is up 6.5%, far less actually than the community-rated plans usually are. BOCES expenses, which is student programming specifically, $940,000. And supply services, $883,000, and that includes a significant increase in transportation costs to make up both for a deficit in this year's budget and going into next year. And that deficit's created by additional transportation needed outside the district and particular accommodations for students with special needs. This, again, is the very condensed version. If you want the full set of slides and a longer version, the 5 o'clock meeting we did that, but for the sake of this discussion, it's the very quick version. The current deficit is $2.7 million, and that's the difference between the cap number, if that was to be the tax increase, and the aid in the governor's proposal, and what we project our spending to be without making changes right now to our current spending. So the projected new spending would be $6.1 million, rolling our current expenses and what we project our needs to be forward. And the revenue expense or the revenue coming in would only be $3.5 million, creating that gap of $2.7 million that we need to find a way to close. And the factors contributing, again, more detail at the 5 o'clock meeting, but very quickly, what you'll see throughout these slides is essentially refunding the areas that we borrowed from in order to close the gap after last year's first budget vote to the second budget vote. For example, restoring the full-day K positions that we need to begin to save towards, adjusting for mandated services that we were able to pull from before, thinking about minimum wage and that increase, and then the compression in contract agreements that happens because of that, and rolling forward any of the contract provisions, already taking out the breakage for potential retirements. Some of the notable areas, our other benefits is down 12.2%, and that's because we had an improvement in terms of our workman's comp. But we're up 9.2% in health insurance specifically, 4% in retirement. That's a bill that we receive, and then payroll taxes up 2.1%. Both of those are things that we are billed, not that we create ourselves. We're up 18% in the business technology services, specifically a $70,000 investment we need to make to comply with Ed Law 2D, which is around cybersecurity. Your children's data are data within the district, financial data, payroll data, et cetera. We're required to make that investment. And then a variety of other areas. Important to take a look at the special education cost in particular, up 22.3%. This is not pitting one group of children against another. This is the reality of what our costs are based on student need. And that is going up pretty significantly going into next year. And then the transportation issue that I mentioned to you before is another area that we have to consider going up. Inflation, thinking about driver wages. I mentioned at the 5 o'clock meeting, unemployment is a great thing overall, except when we're talking about some of our positions then that become harder and harder to fill, and a need then to increase wages in those areas to actually have people to drive the bus. Some of the other areas that we would point out to you, again, increases that we would point out: the special ed contracts tuitions up $113,000, contract transportation up over $500,000, and the debt service that I mentioned to you, that capital expense, $1.6 million. So some of the short-term options we're looking at right now, and we'll explore the next several weeks, is looking at an early aid release, which we've asked the state for Council Rock and the high school, and that would close the gap by $900,000. That's asking the state to provide some of the aid promised for those projects earlier, and defer the phase-in approach to the full-day kindergarten funding. That's not deferring full-day kindergarten. That will happen in 2021. But the phase-in approach, in other words, using aid, the conversion aid from the state, differently than we had planned on, and not using the positions that we have currently budgeted and saved for. The result is eventually that's only a 2-year aid cycle for full-day conversion. We would eventually need to have revenue in the budget to support those positions after that 2-year conversion. So it really just pushes that problem further down the road, but it is an opportunity for this year to close at least part of the gap. So those two together are $1.2 million. Again, we're working on a $2.7 million gap to close. And finally, the board certainly would have the option of looking at an increase in terms of the cap. Every 1% is $535,000. We recognize the community concern with that and what was said to us last year, and are not planning at this point to do that, but feel it's important to at least point out that that would be an option that the board could certainly consider and that the community could weigh in on. The feedback we've gotten at this point is that's not preferable. And then we would look at the bottom bullet, which is a lot of words around the idea that we will look at student programming. That's really the only place to go at this point, and each of our expenditures, and in a targeted manner, looking at the least impact possible to the organization, namely to students, and make reductions along the way and make those suggestions to the board in a final proposal. I'd like to take a look now quickly at what was shared by community members, and this particular chart does tell us a little bit more about each of these areas. And again, just pointing out to you so you can start to think about this, the groups that we'll ask people to divide up into in a little while would be transportation and administrative reductions, and you'll just spend a few minutes talking about that and then ask you to move to the next group, which would be advocacy efforts and professional development. The third being classroom support and additional programming for students, and the fourth being music, art, foreign language, athletics, and clubs. In the meantime, the reason why you'll break up into the groups that way, and I apologize because we lost the chart on the screen. Back up, thank you. If we take a look at the comments in each of those areas, they've been grouped that way so that you have a chance again to maybe give us some additional information to these particular comments that were shared. So for example, in the transportation area, these were specific comments grouped there. Cut private parochial transportation on non-school days. I understand taxpayers who send their children to other schools are entitled to transportation, but it's okay to draw the line at non-school days. I have children in both private and public school. While I appreciate busing on non-school days at private school, I don't think that it's essential. We could also drop the private parochial transportation on non-school days, cut private parochial transportation on non-school days. Cutting private parochial school transportation on non-BCSD days would net a cost savings of about $20,000 to $30,000 based on last year's conversations. Cut it, those dollars could save 0.2 or 0.4 of a position that helps BCSD students. Reevaluate transportation, eliminate buses for private and parochial schools when public school is not in session, etc. So a large majority of these comments were around the private school transportation issue. We are mandated to provide transportation on BCSD school days to private and parochial schools. We have also provided transportation on non-BCSD days. It's a cost of about $50,000, but after state aid, the net is between $20,000 and $30,000 per year. And that particular item we've talked about in the past, although it is not mandated, is certainly a service that's provided to members of our community that are not sending their children to school here every day and are going to a variety of other schools. And that, frankly, is other than the intrinsic and somewhat practical having an educated community and important, obviously, to everybody, it is maybe the one specific service that is provided by the district to those that aren't sending their kids to school here every day. So it's been something we valued in the past, but certainly community members are weighing in on that, and we'd like to get a sense from people when they go to those groups how they feel about that, and if you can explain a little bit more. Our suspicion is, other than that one comment, some people may not understand what that cost actually is and that it's not as significant, or have considered the burden that that would place on some families in our community as well. And then there's a variety of comments around administrative positions, in particular positions mentioned, Assistant Director of Humanities, assistant principal positions were mentioned here. The whole idea being keeping cuts as far away from students as possible, and not a surprise, frankly, that people would also say then teacher positions are directly impacting students. You should take a look at administrative positions and cut that overhead instead of cutting student programming. So certainly when the group gets together, we'd like to hear a little bit more about that. A lot of comments around advocacy that we'd love for people to learn a little bit more about. I've asked Mark Kokonovich to join that particular group and give a very quick snippet on the type of advocacy efforts that are underway so people do understand, because there does seem to be some confusion in some of the comments about whether people are advocating or not. We spend quite a bit of time actually doing that and have for many years. There seems to be an assumption by some people that you have to go after the state and get the funding. It's not that simple. We constantly are doing exactly that. But Mark will be able to explain a little bit about that to each group, too, the types of things we're doing, and what the conversation has been around taking legal action, which people have suggested also. And the short answer is it's a very costly endeavor that has not been successful. There are some people that think maybe it has been. It has not been successful in the state. And frankly, we would have to show injury. The injury is to you as taxpayers. The injury has not been in terms of performance. Our kids are performing as well as they ever have been. And so it's hard to show that somehow kids are being treated unjustly. You as taxpayers, however, I would strongly suggest have been treated unjustly. So certainly something to consider in that conversation. And then a group of comments about classroom support. Basically people saying keep teachers in the classroom, keep programs, keep things that are going to support students the most. There's a pretty mixed bag around music, the arts, modified sports, foreign language at 6th grade. Some people saying this is who we are, this is a big part of Brighton. Other people saying, you know, it's not that important. I'd rather see that not continue to be offered if it means a tax increase or going over the cap. So please don't do that. A variety of comments around that. We'd like to just hear from people a little bit more about how they feel about that. And then some comments around professional development. I do think it's important to point out, we did say at the 5 o'clock meeting, some people thinking that we're sending people internationally on either pleasure trips or for professional development. We do absolutely none of that. There are a group of people away. We sent 82 kids abroad actually over the break on a variety of programs. Those programs are paid for by the fees the children are paying who are going on the trip. The general fund is not paying for people to make those travels, and the one exchange where we have educators going, and that's a trip to Israel, is actually paid for by the Jewish Federation and by some individuals on that trip, but not at all by any district expense. So we just want to make sure that's clear to people because there seems to be a misperception, and I could understand why there'd be concern around that, but we don't pay for that, in fact. We do make some investments in professional development. Frankly, the feeling is though we should always be improving ourselves and thinking about our craft and doing what we can to meet the emerging needs of students as well, and do make an investment there. But certainly would welcome additional feedback on that from folks tonight who would care to weigh in. So with that, pretty quick overview, and all that data is available online. Those links have been shared with the community. They are available on the website. There's a lot more detail for people to dig into and think about, and for them to certainly ask us about. We're happy to do that. But it's a community forum, it's not a Kevin forum, and I've spent 20 minutes talking, and I don't want to keep doing that, but I do want to have an opportunity to answer your questions, gather feedback from you in the next 12 minutes or so before we break into those groups. I'm going to jump into the exchange right now, hoping that people have had an opportunity to do that. And if you're in the room and would like to offer questions or comments for the group, we'll bring a microphone over to you, and you can certainly do that. If you just put your hand up, we'll rotate between these comments and anything you might want to ask in the room. So, first comment up here on the screen I'm seeing, this is in the live exchange right now. There are 10 people in. 9 comments have been added. The first is, how do we reduce $2 million and keep Brighton the special high-functioning district that it is? I think that's an excellent question, and I would ask the audience, is there an answer for that? I hope that's what we're trying to find out, right? So this idea of collaborating with you and asking for your feedback is what we want to know. I think our first priority is we need to get the money, right? So we need to advocate for that and focus on that. But the how do you close the $2 million gap is that last bullet I mentioned in the presentation. To be targeted, to be specific, to be thoughtful about those reductions for the least impact. I think it's important for me to point out there is not a single program that we've talked about that we feel is expendable. Not a single one. We've been working on this now for years. We didn't think several programs we've reduced in the past were expendable, but we had to make difficult decisions over time. We're at a point now where the programs and their reductions will hurt. We don't want to do any of that. We, I think, have had really good suggestions from people on how to modify programs, how to offer them differently, how to still maintain the special unique nature of some of our programs without cutting them entirely. We're open to those suggestions. We're going to look at those also. But that's the challenge. That question is exactly the question we're constantly asking ourselves at this point. I'm willing to go over the tax cap one more time to offset this deficit. I know the state let us down, but as a community member, I will not let down our children. Certainly a good feedback for us, but not something that was communicated clearly during last year's vote or necessarily throughout the year. It was clear to us that that's not something that a majority of community members wanted to do. If the original budget had been approved last year, would we have the working gap of $2.7 million? I'm concerned the first budget vote last year has put us into greater debt. That is correct. The budget vote last year certainly has had a significant impact on this. So the difference alone in the tax increases, if you think about the levy, so the bucket, the levy, the amount of money collected from the community, if that amount of money had been higher coming into this year, the percentage increase over that higher amount of money would yield more tax revenue in the following year, and the base amount would have been bigger. So yes, that $2.7 million would be considerably less. We would still have a gap. We've had a gap every year, but it would be less. And that was clearly what we communicated throughout the process, that the reason for going over the cap last year and that tax increase last year was to avoid going forward, the need to do that. But that was the result. That's where we're at. And certainly the gap, yes. The dynamics are that it would be smaller. Please don't put off kindergarten planning. That could put us in a terrible spot down the road. We don't disagree. I think that that is a strategy that we're going to have to take a look at, but we will still have kindergarten in 2021. It's a question of how we will fund that.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sure.
In the survey that was sent around the Thought Exchange, there was a comment about the idea of suggesting cutting ESS at the high school level because some people perceive that it overlapped with AP or honors or other enrichment opportunities. And I was hoping that the role of ESS at the high school and the value of it could be clarified. That offers an opportunity for in-depth study that's different from the subject-specific AP classes. And at this critical time when students are making decisions about college and careers, having the opportunity to do in-depth work, to be exposed to guest speakers or opportunities in the community, to be directed toward opportunities within the district and in the Rochester area. These are such important opportunities that don't happen in a traditional classroom setting. And I think that some of the comments that suggest that it's interchangeable with APs or with honors don't capture the importance of that. I think one of the reasons why many people are attracted to the district is because there is ESS from elementary through high school, and that's one of the wonderful things that makes our district distinctive, and it's not simply offering APs that people can take at other high schools. So things like the music program that's won national recognition, ESS and these other things that, there's so many comments about preserving the academic excellence and the education and the teachers. I would ask that ESS be given careful attention, because I think that suggestion that it's simply duplicating other parts of the curriculum may be a misunderstanding, and would want to hear from parents and other students about the value of those opportunities.
I think you said it best, actually. And the microphone, if anybody has a question, is so that you're picked up by the audio for the broadcast. So we could definitely hear you in here, but if you're wondering why we're using that. I think you said it very, very well. It is a unique opportunity and is different than the content-specific advanced placement courses, and does provide a layer that is different from what other people are providing. Agreed, and thank you for, I think, further expanding on that for people. Anybody else in the room have anything that they would like to mention?
At the programs and other things and be able to figure out what the cost is and is it worth it versus other programs. Just look at everything.
Yeah, so throughout the budget process, we will present on specific items with dollar amounts attached to them. And so we'll, as those are assessed and as specific options are reviewed by the board, each of those costs will be presented. And we did last year in that process after the first budget vote, go through those line by line with dollar amounts attached to those. And those are still posted online too, and we'll double check and make sure that that's all available to you.
So it's up now.
I think it is up now. Dan, are those documents from last year still posted? Yep.
So the things that you're looking to cut this year would be pretty comparable to the stuff last year?
Pretty close.
And it would break down to things like ESS, AP classes, extracurriculars?
Yep. It depends on, yes, I mean, there's a lot of there are many specific items within that. Maybe not exactly how you've listed them, but yes, there are specific dollar amounts attached to specific programs.
If we really wanted to get further into it, could we break it? Could we get into there and see down to those little programs?
It's a great question. I think you are welcome to any of that data and that information, and whether that's, we need to have you in to work through exactly what you are looking for and then get you that number, we can do that. But you're talking about in an $80 million budget, each individual line gets very granular. But yes, that information is all something that we'd be happy to provide to anybody.
Great, thanks.
You bet. Any other question or comment in the room? So we'll take a couple more of these. Quality teachers are essential along with our mental health staff. Our children need these educators and these services. We would agree. That's actually something we certainly have prioritized in our budget planning, and even last year in the gap between budget 1 and budget 2, we continued to prioritize mental health services and still find a way to support that, recognizing that as essential for kids and their success. not just success academically, but success in terms of being happy and healthy and able to participate fully in the program. Special programming for students should not be reduced. We don't disagree. Quality teachers are essential along with our mental health. I'm sorry, I read that one already. What can the community do to get the state to understand this funding issue? Our political leaders need to hear from us. There are many leaders in the room from Fight for Brighton. I would continue to thank them for their advocacy, their help, their tenacious approach to advocating on our behalf. And I would encourage you to visit their Facebook page, the Fight for Brighton page, and participate in the many ways that they have suggested and offered as opportunities for advocacy. It's not just about contacting our local legislators, because we don't have an assembly person right now, and our state senator is not in the majority, and I think it's important to be contacting decision makers who can actually impact that, and all that information is available from Fight for Brighton. Contact them, then contact them again, and then please contact them again after that. Why do you think more kids need SPED services? Someone should be looking into why the needs are growing and figure out why so many kids have these needs. I think, frankly, we continue to provide excellent services for kids, and the cost of those services, not necessarily the number. So in terms of what people are seeing here is an increase in cost. What I would say to you is the increase in the number of kids classified or identified is not necessarily commensurate with that. Programs may be getting more expensive. So as you see an incremental cost increase for us in terms of what we offer, those same incremental increases are experienced by the providers that are providing those programs in outside placements. And so the tuition for those placements goes up based on that incremental cost as well. And in any given period of time, the particular student needs may be a more expensive program, and in future years you may have less students that need that more expensive program. That certainly ebbs and flows over time. But we are always thinking about how to best meet the needs of students. And programming gets more advanced. We get better at it, but it also then has a cost increase associated with that. Will we get to see a breakdown of cost of programs and salaries? I'd like to see cost of things and can ask questions related to facts. We certainly can make any of that available to anybody if they'd like to contact specifically Lou Alimo, our Assistant Superintendent for Administration. He's happy to dig into all that information. We provided that to people certainly in the past, and throughout the budget process, we do share in terms of specifically categorical information for people to take a look at as well. We're going to take one last look at the thought exchange data, and I'll just refresh the screen and see if there's any additional comments that have come in. Appears like we're in about the same spot that we were before. So what we'd like to do now is just transition with you to some group work. And I would put up again on the screen the link so that people have this going forward. Continue to weigh in even after tonight. Dan will continue to make this available as well. And it's good feedback for us to consider throughout the process. So what we're going to do next is this group work, and we thank everybody on the Facebook Live feed for joining us and participating as they did. Sorry that you couldn't be in the room with us for this part, but we certainly welcome you to any board meetings coming up and future opportunities to exchange dialogue and information with us. So the groups at this point, and
This has been a special presentation from the Brighton Central School District Board of Education.